Unfortunately, death is a very real part of life that no one can either predict or evade. Death knows no age, ethnicity, marital status, or religion, and can come when we least expect it. Yet no matter the timing, the process of death also brings unbearable grief and sadness for those who have been left behind, as they try to cope and navigate a life that no longer includes those that were so dear. However, imagine being at a wake and hearing strange sounds coming from inside the coffin, or being told that a loved one has passed, only to see them later exhibit clear signs of life. Now imagine that what you saw or heard was no mistake at all on your part, but rather a report of death that was made in error. This episode includes frightening but very real situations of a similar nature. Here are 10 people who were declared dead, but were still very much alive. "76-year-old Bella Montoya, a retired nurse in Babahoyo, Ecuador, was taken to the emergency room of a local hospital on June 9, 2023, after suffering a possible stroke and cardiopulmonary arrest, which left her unconscious. Unfortunately, Montoya did not respond to resuscitation efforts and was declared dead a few hours later. Montoya was then transported to a funeral home the same day, and her family prepared to hold a wake in her honor. However, to the shock of those in attendance, approximately 5 hours into the wake, they began hearing strange sounds coming from inside Montoya's coffin. When the casket was opened, Montoya was found inside, wrapped in sheets, breathing heavily, and very much alive. Naturally, Montoya's family rushed her back to the hospital, where she was intubated and placed in intensive care. It is believed that when Montoya experienced cardiorespiratory arrest, she also began suffering from catalepsy, a trance-like state which causes a loss of voluntary motion, muscle rigidity, sensitivity to pain, and slowed breathing. Unfortunately, this mistaken set of symptoms may also have led to Montoya being declared dead. The Health Ministry has launched an investigation into the doctors who treated Montoya, and a technical committee has also been formed to review the hospital's process of issuing death certificates. Sadly, Montoya died a week later after suffering a stroke while in the hospital. 29-year-old Gonzalo Jimenez had been sentenced to 2.5 years for robbery and was serving his sentence at the Villabona Penitentiary Center in Asturias, Spain. Gonzalo failed to present himself for the daily head count on January 7, 2018, and was later found unconscious in a chair inside his cell with no signs of life. Given that Gonzalo showed signs of cyanosis, a condition in which the skin, lips, or nails turn blue from a lack of oxygen in the blood, discoloration of his face, and rigor mortis, he was declared dead by 3 separate forensic doctors who examined him. However, it wasn't until 4 hours later, when he was on the slab at the morgue with his body already marked for the autopsy, that he began to snore, alerting the pathologist that he was indeed alive. Gonzalo was rushed to the emergency room and placed in intensive care, where he later regained consciousness. Gonzalo's family stated he had epilepsy, and they believed he may not have been taking his medication properly. While Gonzalo's epilepsy could have led to catalepsy, which would have put him in a trance-like state, neither condition was confirmed as the cause of his previous death ruling. In the early morning hours of February 15, 2023, 43-year-old Phoebe Maxwell heard a thump coming from her father, 66-year-old Thomas Maxwell's bedroom. Upon checking on Thomas, Phoebe found him lying on the floor. She offered to help, but assuming his fall was related to his sciatica, her father insisted he would get up himself and get back in bed within a few minutes. However, when Phoebe checked on her father again around 10 a.m., he was still in the same position, but this time his lips were blue and his body was cold. Phoebe began performing CPR while her mother called 911. When paramedics arrived at the Clearwater, Florida home, they reported that Thomas was not breathing, had no pulse, was cold to the touch, and was completely unresponsive. They then pronounced him dead. Regardless of their determination, Phoebe heard Maxwell making noises and argued that her father was not dead. The paramedics, however, advised her that the noises were simply gases leaving the body, and once the sheriff's department arrived, the medics left. Thankfully, when one of the sergeants went into Thomas's room, He pulled back the sheet covering his body and heard him gasp for air. Not only was he breathing, but he also had a pulse. At that time, a different EMT department was contacted, who rushed to the home with a defibrillator before transporting Thomas to the hospital. Once at the hospital, it was determined that he suffered cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, and injuries to his kidney, arteries, and lungs, so he was placed on a ventilator and put into an induced coma. On February 17, 2023, Thomas woke up, and after spending a week in the ICU, he was released home. The two paramedics who initially responded to the home were later fired due to their negligence. On November 7, 2003, 20-month-old Michaela Jesperson slipped out the sliding glass door and into the backyard of her home in Fullerton, California, where the pool was after her mother briefly left the living room to wake her 4-year-old sister. Unfortunately, Michaela's mother later found her face down in the pool. In an attempt to save the little girl, her mother jumped in, pulled her out, and called 911. When police officers arrived on scene, they performed CPR, as did the paramedics who later arrived. From there, she was taken to a local hospital. Emergency room doctors continued to attempt resuscitation efforts using CPR, breathing tubes, and a heated blanket. However, given that Michaela's heart monitor still had a flat line approximately 1 hour after being found in the pool, she was disconnected from the breathing tube and pronounced dead. 40 minutes later, as detectives began photographing her body and making notes, they noticed Michaela's chest moving. The detectives initially believed the spasms were simply part of the natural process of releasing gas. However, as the spasms continued and became longer, the detectives went to get help from medical personnel, who were thankfully able to revive her. While Michaela survived the horrific accident, she was left with severe brain damage, given that she was deprived of oxygen for so long. Michaela's family went on to file a medical malpractice lawsuit against the hospital, as well as the physician who treated the child. On November 18, 2021, 40-year-old Srikesh Kumar was hit by a speeding motorbike in India and suffered an internal head injury. Srikesh was taken to a private hospital and treated, but referred to another hospital, eventually going to a total of 3 in search of treatment. After finally reaching a district hospital, Srikesh was examined by a doctor multiple times, but after finding no heartbeat, pulse, or blood pressure, he was declared dead. His body was then taken to a mortuary freezer. Approximately 7 hours later, when Srikesh's family met with police officers to identify his body and agree to an autopsy, his sister-in-law, Madhu Bala, noticed that his cheeks were warm and he was showing signs of life. The doctors were alerted immediately, and he was transferred to a health center in Meerut. The circumstances surrounding Srikesh's death ruling were believed to have been a case of suspended animation, a state in which the life of a body is slowed down or stopped. Additionally, given that the hospital experienced issues with the power in the mortuary freezer, the switching off and on may have saved Srikesh during the time he was inside. However, due to his internal head injuries, Srikesh slipped into a coma once at the health center in Meerut. He was also suffering from a bleeding disorder, which meant that surgery was not an option. Therefore, he was placed on a ventilator and given medication. Unfortunately, due to a clot in his brain, Srikesh died 5 days later. After 3 years of trying to conceive, Kate Ogg became pregnant with twins. However, in March of 2010, she gave birth to the twins, Emily and Jamie, prematurely at 27 weeks. Emily survived the premature birth, but Jamie had stopped breathing, and his heartbeat was nearly gone. Doctors fought for 20 minutes to save Jamie's life, trying to get him to breathe, but when they were unsuccessful, Jamie was pronounced dead. Kate placed Jamie on her bare chest, and as she and her husband David began to say their goodbyes, Jamie started making short, startled movements that only became more pronounced. The doctor, however, insisted that Jamie's movements were nothing more than reflexes, standing behind his previous declaration of death. However, after 2 hours, Jamie opened his eyes, and it was at that moment that the couple began to question the doctor. From there, Jamie grabbed at their fingers and even later accepted a dab of breast milk that Kate had put on her fingertip. Even amid these signs of life, both the medical staff and the doctor refused to accept the possibility of Jamie being alive. In a final plea to get someone to listen, Kate and David decided to lie and told the doctor that they had finally accepted their son's death, knowing he would return to their hospital room. When the doctor finally returned to the room, he got a stethoscope and listened to Jamie's chest, astounded to hear signs of life. The hospital staff leaped into action, and after 80 days in the neonatal unit, both Jamie and Emily were able to go home. Miraculously, Jamie suffered no medical issues. The parents credit the practice of kangaroo care, holding your baby skin to skin and generating warmth, for saving Jamie's life. 28-year-old Hamdi AlNubi, a waiter in Luxor, Egypt, suffered a heart attack while working in May of 2012 and was later pronounced dead at the hospital. On May 11, 2012, his family took him home to prepare his body for burial. This process, known as ghusl mayit, is part of Islamic tradition and is carried out by family members of the same sex. All parts of the body are washed with soap and water in a specific way that still provides both privacy and dignity for the deceased. The body is then wrapped in a clean white cloth. It is believed that 3 things occur during this process of washing, shrouding, and burying the dead. The body returns to the earth, the soul faces judgment, and the living are reminded that their time on earth is limited. After burial preparations were done, a doctor arrived to sign Hafez AlNubi's death certificate, only to discover his body was still warm. She later found he was indeed alive. Hafez AlNubi's mother fainted when she heard the news. Thankfully, she too was revived, and the once tragic situation turned into a celebration. On September 26, 2021, 15-year-old Tori Anto Jr. was involved in a car accident in Missouri City, Texas, and was ejected out of the car window. When emergency responders arrived on the scene, Jr. wasn't breathing or moving and was unresponsive. He was taken to a local hospital by life flight but was later pronounced dead. However, Jr.'s mother, 39-year-old Lakeisha Wells, refused to accept the tragic news of her son's death and began praying for him. As she held Jr.'s hand and prayed, she saw him move, and that bit of activity was enough to allow him to be taken into surgery. Jr. suffered severe brain damage as a result of the accident and underwent a total of 4 brain surgeries, spent 21 days in a coma and several months in a semi-coma before being transferred to a rehabilitation facility. There, he had to learn to do the most basic tasks all over again, such as how to brush his teeth, take a bath, and even eat. Less than 1 year later, the teenager who was once deemed dead was recovering well, excelling in school, and even playing on his high school basketball team. On January 7, 2023, 16-year-old Sammy Burko of Missouri City, Texas, went with a group of friends to a local rock climbing gym. However, after reaching the top and ringing the bell, he became completely limp. He was slowly lowered to the ground and given CPR until first responders arrived on the scene. Sammy was then taken to a local hospital, where doctors tirelessly continued performing CPR. Unfortunately, after 2 hours of unsuccessful attempts, he was pronounced dead. Sammy's parents, Jen and Craig, were left to say their goodbyes to their son, but just 5 short minutes later, something amazing happened. He began moving. The attending physician initially believed the movement to be nothing more than a reflex, but when Jen noticed Sammy's carotid artery move, Craig began shouting about his heartbeat and rushed to get help from the medical staff. The staff wasted no time in getting to Sammy, and thankfully, they were able to stabilize him. Sammy suffered an ischemic spine injury, also called a spinal cord stroke, which occurs when the blood supply to a section of the spinal cord is cut off. He also suffered short-term memory loss due to a lack of oxygen to his brain and was paralyzed from the waist down. It was later discovered that Sammy had a rare genetic condition called catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, an inherited heart condition that causes abnormal heartbeats during exercise or periods of strong emotion when adrenaline levels are high. It can also cause the heart to stop beating if left untreated. Testing revealed that Sammy's mother has the same genetic condition as did his younger brother Frankie, who died in 2020 after suffering from seizures. Sammy later underwent a procedure called a sympathectomy, in which a surgeon cuts or clamps the sympathetic nerve, also known as the flight or fight nerve. This keeps nerve signals from passing through it. He was also placed on medication that will reduce the likelihood of an adrenaline rush causing cardiac arrest in the future. In the middle of the night on August 5, 2013, 37-year-old Tony Yall, a diesel mechanic in West Carrollton, Ohio, began breathing strangely. His wife checked his pulse and tried to wake him but got no response. In a panic, she called 911 and he was transported to a local hospital by ambulance. Unfortunately, Tony's heart went into a fatal arrhythmia, which are serious, life-threatening irregular heartbeats, and after medical personnel attempted to stimulate his heart for 45 minutes without success, Tony was declared dead. A cardiologist called the time of death and advised his family to say their goodbyes. However, it was at that moment that Tony's son Lawrence pointed at his father and said, "Dad, you're not going to die today." As Lawrence prepared to return to his family's side, Tony began showing signs of life, and his heartbeat returned, all just moments before his body was set to go to the morgue. Tony was then taken by helicopter to another hospital, where he spent 5 days in a coma before fully awakening. Doctors were unable to pinpoint what exactly caused his heart to stop, as they found no heart defects. The husband and father of 3 was released from the hospital on August 15, 2013, without any further complications. I'd like to take a second to thank you for tuning into Horrific Nightmares. If you would like to support this channel, you can leave a comment below and hit the like button. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with anyone you know who may enjoy it as well. And if you already aren't, I hope you would consider subscribing to the channel so that you won't miss any of my upcoming episodes. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.